It is a blessing that I have the opportunity to share a message that I've entitled Release to the good folks of Bloomington Eastview Church of the Nazarene, whose pastor, Reverend Josh, and Jennifer Kaplinger are celebrating the birth of a new daughter, Claire Hope Kaplinger, who also will have a helping hand of her sister Caroline. And so thankful for this parsonage family and their ministry, not only there in Bloomington, but literally all across the Southwest Indiana district. And when Josh asked me to preach a message and have that available for you, I thought, now I can't do anything but just be a blessing to the Kaplingers and the great folks at Bloomington Eastview. I'm in the midst of a sermon series that I entitled The Fabric of Life. We've been looking, as I've been preaching across the Southwest Indiana district, this series on the book of Ecclesiastes. And 5 weeks ago, we started this journey. And as I read the first words of this book, I soon discovered that we were going to be looking deeply into our own individual lives. And Solomon, who generally is believed to have been the author of this book, says this. He says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, before you shut off this sermon, I want to say that it's important you understand that what that word meaningless in the original language, which was habel, means. It's a picture, not that saying to us that life in and of itself is meaningless, but that life is short. It's like a vapor. It's here one moment and then it's gone. And I have to tell you today that it's hard for me to believe that I'm not just graduating from college and in my first church. It just seems like the years have just been flying by. And in that first message 5 weeks ago, we discovered when we came to the end of chapter 2 here in the book of Ecclesiastes, we made a significant discovery concerning this vaporous life that we live. And that is that it is God who can give us purpose in the life that each and every one of us have. In fact, Solomon says that for without God, who can eat or find enjoyment? He tells us that the key to life is to be in relationship with our Creator, and that it is in that relationship that you and I can not only enjoy life, but we can make it from moment to moment, difficulty to joys. 4 weeks ago, we looked at the topic or the subject of time, and we discovered that there is a time and season for everything. In fact, that none of us can control time or the circumstances, but we can trust God. And also we learned that God didn't create us for 50 years or 60 years or even 70 or 80 years. When God created us, He was creating us for all eternity. Well, 3 weeks ago, we looked at the topic of injustice, and wow, was that a timely message? Because that's exactly what our nation and so many of our communities and states like in Minnesota and elsewhere are dealing with today. We examined the ways that people deal with the wrong things and the unfair things that happen in life, and how some people, what they do is they deny that injustice exists. In fact, they would just want to duck and run, or they want to bury their head in the sand and say injustice doesn't exist. But you know what? You look around, you walk through life any distance at all, and you're quickly going to discover that there is injustice. In fact, some of you have experienced times of injustice yourself. Well, there's other people that kind of gloss over injustice, and what they do is they love using cliches. They'll say, well, God's got something good with that, and often we don't deal with the injustice of life. And then there are others that seek to blame others. Well, the author of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, he confessed a faith in God. And he said that one day God would deal with the injustices of life. And in that message, I shared about 7 things that we needed to know as we live a life in a world that is filled with injustice. And I said, don't consider it unusual if someone mistreats you or you experience injustice. You know, life's not always fair, but God is not life. God's above life, and He's beyond life. I also shared that you don't let what you can't understand destroy what you can enjoy. And don't live in constant fear of what might happen, but recognize who you are in comparison to God, that He loves you. He's the creator. He created you. And then believe that God will deal with injustice. Our problem is that we're wanting instant injustice to be dealt with when someone has hurt us. But when we have been the one that was causing the injustice, we look for grace and mercy and patience from God and from others. And I close that message by encouraging people to live in community and not in isolation, that together we are better. Well, 2 weeks ago, Solomon talked to us about profit. And we learned all kinds of things, that it really doesn't matter how much we have, that there's a tendency for most of us to want just a little bit more. And that if you love money, you will never have enough. And isn't that true? That even if our bank accounts are more, we're making more each week, we just want a little bit more. But Solomon reminds us that all of us are going to leave this world the same way. Even though that in some of the caskets that I've noticed when people have died, that they've even now installed a drawer where you can put things in it, I want to let you know, we really take nothing with us. In fact, I closed that message by asking the question, how can you profit as a follower of God? And I told you that you needed to listen to God and then offer God the true, the best sacrifice that you can, which is our very life. And then be slow to speak. And I wasn't talking about our pace. I was talking about not jumping to judgment and not being quick to give everybody our suggestions, but really be slow. Let God be the one to deal with people. Well, last week, I shared a message on godly poise, and boy, do we need that today. How to keep one's composure when life is difficult and God seems to be silent. And again, I shared some things about we need godly wisdom rather than understanding. In fact, Solomon elsewhere in Proverbs chapter 3 told us not to lean on our own understanding, but in all our ways acknowledge Him, and that He would direct our path. I shared with you that Solomon told us that we need to recognize our place with those in authority, and boy, do we have trouble with that these days. And not to try to fix every situation or to fixate on our circumstances. And that we needed to realize what sin does to people, how it enslaves them and brings them pain each and every day. But regardless of what happens, that we need to fear God and enjoy life and to rest in His sovereignty and, yes, even in His silence. Well, today, that was a long introduction for you folks. In fact, I want to let you know, I think I've given you already now 4 or 5 messages that would help you through the course of this coming week. But I want to share with you a message that I've entitled Release. And I'm in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, and I actually have a prop that I have brought with me to help me in this message. I think it may help you remember how to put into place this week this brief message I have for you. So let me get it real quickly. When I was a kid, I want to let you know that I had a balloon. In fact, I want you to know that this balloon had helium. And I want you to know I was so excited when I had that balloon. I was holding on to the string, and I don't know what it was. I somehow got distracted with everything that was taking place. And maybe it was because I didn't know that just because I was holding on to a balloon, what could happen to it. But I want to let you know what happened. Somehow I let go of that balloon, and you now know what happened. That balloon, it disappeared. It went up into the sky. And I think that, well, there was really a crowd of people who saw my balloon going up in all of its beautiful glory. And I got a feeling that somebody says, I wonder what kid released his balloon. Well, I'm going to tell you what my parents did. My parents, I am sure, were not thrilled that I had let my balloon go. And because I want to let you know, I wasn't happy that the balloon was released and was going up, 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 and up. In fact, I'm convinced today that what they wanted to do, and probably the next time I got a balloon, they tied the string around my wrist so they wouldn't have to hear me moan and groan and complain and cry. Because somehow I thought that because my balloon had left my control, that somehow my life was never going to work and never going to be the kind of life that I had hoped for. Well, I want to tell you, there was another time I got a balloon. And I'm not 100% sure, but I still convinced my parents tied the string around my hand. When we got home, they probably cut the string and the balloon was in my bedroom and it went to the ceiling. But something happened after a couple days as I noticed my balloon had fallen from the ceiling and it lay shriveled next to my bed. You know, when I think about that, I think about many people that I've met in pastoral ministry and life in general. You know what I find? I find a lot of people are unwilling to release the things that happen in their life, even some of the best things. And they end up turning to a place where they shrink and they become shriveled. And before long, they can never imagine ever letting go. I want you to know that there are two ways that you can live life. You can hold on for dear life, whether it's a people or your past or your fears or your hurts, or you can let go. You can release the things that people have said, the things that people have done, the hurts that have happened to you, the mistakes that you've made, the fear that conquered you for a season of time in your life. You see, when you release those things and you let go and let God have His way in your life, you see, to release means to let go of. To release means that you discharge from an obligation. To release means to relinquish one's right or claim. Listen to what Ecclesiastes chapter 11, beginning with verse 1, what Solomon was trying to say to us. He says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again." Now that's a very interesting verse. In fact, depending on your translation, even the newer NIV says it this way. It says, "Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return." That's an interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. Look at verse 2. "Give portions to 7, yes, to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain upon the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there will it lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant, and whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. So sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let not your hands be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well." I want to share with you real quickly 7 things that Solomon is teaching us. And I want you to put them in your life today. You know what? Whatever you're holding on to, maybe it's your family, maybe it's your finances, maybe it's your faith, whatever it is. Maybe it's some past hurts. I think today God wants us to release, to trust Him, and to boldly go, just like that balloon did, upward and onward. Here's the first thing He tells us. He says, release your life boldly. When Solomon said, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again," I think that he was using a language, I think he was using a phrase that I think mattered. It was something that everybody knew. Because you see, I think they had a decision to make when they were planting their crop, and whether it was wheat or whatever the grain was. You see, the safest thing for them to do would have been to harvest the grain and to make bread. But the way that they could really invest and make even more was to take that grain and in faith put it upon a ship and let that ship go out into the ocean, out into the sea, and see if they can go someplace, to another community, to another port, and to be able to sell it. And then to have whoever sells that grain come back and give them the profit. You see, the safest thing is often what we choose. But you see, as followers of Jesus Christ, we need to put our faith in Jesus. We need to put our faith in the God that created us, that He can go with us. You see, Solomon is telling us that we have a choice in living life. We have a choice as a pastor. We have choice as leaders within the church. And God is encouraging us to live boldly, to cast our bread on the water, to see what happens. He's telling us don't play it safe. Don't let fear and paranoia rule your life. Instead, enjoy life rather than endure it. Now, isn't that the kind of message we need to hear today? As we find ourselves in the midst of this pandemic, and many people are afraid to go to a store or get out and go to a church or any place. I want to ask you today, are you trying to hold on? Or are you living boldly? Let your balloon soar. Let your life be a light in the midst of the darkness. Now, some of you, you're looking at your life today and you're afraid of releasing a past hurt. In fact, what you've chosen to do is you rehearse that past hurt. You can tell me what someone said to you 20 years ago, and you just replay it, and you're living with it. I wonder how many of us are carrying strings that have been tied around our wrist. And instead of releasing, that balloon is shriveled and we're just dragging it with us everywhere we go. You see, Solomon instructs us in verse 2 to give portions or to invest 7 or 8 times. He's saying just don't do one thing, and if it didn't work, stop. And so maybe today you're here and you're listening to this message and you've gone through a divorce and you're saying, I'm never going to trust another person. Not going to do that. I'm not going to open myself up to be loved and to be hurt. And I want to say to you, you're carrying around a shriveled balloon behind you. Maybe it was a loss of a job. You worked for a company for 20 years and you gave them everything and they've just laid you off. Maybe it was a friend who betrayed you. Or maybe you feel like a church let you down or a pastor. I'm telling you, release your past hurts. Let them go, just like that balloon. Launch them. And if you have to, go get a helium balloon. Ride on that balloon. You're hurt, the thing that happened, and let it go and release it. You see, I've had to let go of many of the past memories and hurts in my own life. Here's the second thing Solomon tells us. He says, release your fear of failure. You see, there are some of us that, because something didn't go well in our life, we've said, I'm not going to try again. You see, there is risk in every activity, but we can either live in fear or we can release our fear of failure so that we can fully invest ourselves in living. There's a third thing that Solomon tells us, and that is diversify because life is unpredictable. He says that in verse 2. Again, he's instructing us to diversify our life portfolio. He says, don't put all your eggs in one basket. He's saying, don't be foolish. Don't count on just one thing to bring you joy and fulfillment. Don't gamble everything on just doing one thing. You see, there's some of us who thought, you know what, if I land this job, then I can be happy. Or if I could marry this person, then life would be great. Or if I could have 2 kids or 5 kids or no kids at all. But here's what I've learned about life. You never know what God's going to bless. And you never know what's going to work. I found that to be true as a pastor. I have found that sometimes what worked at one church won't work in another. And so you can never just do one thing. But I found a lot of churches afraid to do anything. In fact, some churches right now are just trying to survive, when what God's looking for is for us to release and thrive. My prayer today for Bloomington Eastview and for Southwest Indiana District and for any church anywhere on this globe, it is that we wouldn't cling to our past, but we would boldly embrace the future. And just like the rocket that I just saw blast off after 9 years, you know what? After 9 years, we finally, in the United States of America, released another rocket into the sky. Aren't we glad? Here we have 2 astronauts who have gone up into space for us. We never know from day to day what encounter we can have to help someone connect with Jesus Christ. Well, here's the fourth thing Solomon says, and that is realize in life there are some things that you can depend on. Verse 3 says, if clouds are full of water, they pour rain upon this earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. In this uncertain world, where we can't believe half of what we're being told from one scientist, from one politician to another, I want you to know there are some things that we can count on. And with all due respect to Benjamin Franklin, death and taxes are not the only things we can count on. I want you to know that you can count on your Creator. I want you to know that He has promised to never leave us or forsake us. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Man, those are good words for us. It tells us something. It tells us that, yes, if we're evil and we're sowing evil deeds and evil acts, that we're going to have a payday. But it also tells us on a positive side, you know what? If you sow seeds of gentleness and kindness and love, you know what? Those seeds are going to bring a harvest. You know, living life like Jesus, it can be filled with disappointments and challenges, but it is also filled with joys and victories and positive endeavors. When everything around you seems to be shriveling, plant seeds of hope, seeds of joy, seeds that God is giving you, and cast the seeds everywhere you go. Solomon teaches us a fifth thing. He says, don't wait for perfect conditions or circumstances in living life. He says that in verse 4. He says, whoever watches the wind will not plant, and whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. You see, too many times we're waiting for that perfect moment. It's kind of like the Kodak moment, you know, that moment that we're going to remember forever. But God says now is the time of salvation. Today is the day. Truthfully, life is a matter of living each and every hour, each and every minute in faith. And faith is about saying, God, you take control. I release control. I release my balloon. I release my hurt. I release, Lord, what I think my church should do and what I should do and what my mate should do. And I'm going to give you control. You see, the problem is we keep waiting for the right opportunity. Maybe we're waiting for the right emotion. You see, it's only when we release that God gets the glory and God gets control. You see, faith isn't always about knowing. In fact, it's not always about assurance that it's going to go the way we want. It is all about trust. It's saying, Lord, I believe in you. And I know that you want what's better than even what I want. The sixth thing that Solomon says is keep trusting God and doing what you know is right. In other words, don't rely on your own understanding. And boy, we get into trouble that way. The longer I think we live, the more we think that because we've lived so many years that we've got all the answers. I just want to let you know that the person that I love, who I have lived with for over 30 years, she constantly, she's encouraged me to recognize that I don't understand everything. In fact, she tells me that I've got to seek God, because if not, I'll lean on my own understanding. Well, here's the seventh thing that Solomon, the last thing he shares. He says, remember that the results are in God's hands, not ours. But that whatever we do, we work at it with all our might. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 6 says, sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let not your hands be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. You see, we don't always know what God's going to do. So use your life wisely. Get up early and sow your seed. Work hard. Do your job. Trust God. And you know what? Be amazed at what He can do. You know what? It was a sad day when I released that balloon. But it wasn't going to last forever. You know, it was when I released it that others noticed. And even though I was sad, I was learning that I can trust God. And you know what? After all these years, I've learned that sometimes God doesn't give me everything I want, but He has given me more than I've ever deserved. You know, some of you right now, maybe in the midst of this message, you've been thinking about some of the things that you're holding on to. Some of the things that maybe you've tied a string on and they're dragging behind you and they're shriveled and really they're slowing you down in this thing called life. Today, I want to invite you to release those past hurts. Those expectations that you had of others or maybe yourself. Let them go. Let them go. And then I want you to realize that God gives us all this thing called life. He wants you to release it. It's really not your life. You see, when Christ comes into your life, He is your life. He's your all. So release it. Give him your one and only life. You know, it's interesting, your pastor and his precious wife and Caroline, you know what? Their life has suddenly changed. And really, it's been changed now for several months. But you know what? They had to release. And they were not guaranteed that little Claire Hope was going to come into this world. There was no guarantee. But I want to let you know that they put their trust in God. And you know what? Their life will never be the same. God has given them such a precious blessing. And I can't help but think, if every one of you who hear this message, if you would give God your one and only life, that your life would be filled with joy and peace and happiness. And in fact, you would learn that God can be trusted in every moment of your life. Let me pray for you. Father, we thank you today for this day. And I pray that you would pour out a blessing upon any person that hears this message. Lord, help us to get rid of the shriveled balloon that we drag through life. And Lord, may we boldly release this thing called life. God, pour out a blessing today upon the Kaplingers. I pray for healing and joy and happiness, Lord, to be theirs in these days, months, and years ahead. Pour out a special blessing, Lord, for Bloomington Eastview. We ask all of this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, God bless you. Have a great day.